reasons, because my wife and I are celebrating our 12th anniversary today. We've been blessed with 12 years of marriage together. And I want to talk about marriage and just give kind of 3 highlights dealing with marriage that I want to just give you as guides that hopefully you will take from God's Word. In Genesis chapter 2 and in John chapter 2, there are 2 marriages. You're familiar with them. In Genesis chapter 2, there's the marriage of 2 individuals. Clifton, who's in Genesis chapter 2, first 2 people alive. Adam and Eve, they get married. Chapter 2, remember what happens there? Eve's brought to Adam, the 2 become one. Excellent. Now, in John chapter 2, Dave, that's a little different. What marriage is going on there? We don't have any real names. But John chapter 2, you don't know. What? We don't have any names. It's the marriage at Cana. It's where the first miracle occurs. And so we're going to see 2 things from these 2 marriages that I think could help all of us out. Number 1 is that in both marriages, there were problems. In the first marriage, in the Garden of Eden, there was a problem. Eve did not want to submit to Adam, wanted to do what she wanted to do, and she saw the fruit, and it caused an issue. In John chapter 2, what was the issue that they had at their marriage ceremony? They ran out of wine. They had a problem. So, what I want you to see is that in any marriage, there are going to be problems. There are going to be issues. If you are stepping into a marriage and think there's not going to be, there's a rude awakening. But the beautiful part is that in every one of those situations that we mentioned, Genesis 2 and John 2, God fixed it. God fixed the problem. In John chapter 2, the issue with the wine, what did Jesus do to fix the problem? You remember? Took water into wine. So that was the first thing I'd like to teach as lessons of married couples is number 1, that you will face problems, but that God is able to fix all our problems. He can deal with all issues that you face as long as you come to Him and seek Him for help. And that's number 2. Number 2 lesson to think about when you think about marriage. One of the situations got fixed after they had to be cursed. Another one got fixed after they asked for assistance. I would encourage you in a marriage couple, number 1 is to acknowledge that you have need of help. One of the first things you realize as a married couple is that there may be situations you don't have the answer to. Who do you turn to for advice? Oftentimes the world turns to the world for advice. They turn to the TV, maybe to Oprah or Dr. Phil or some psychologist or maybe a marriage counselor. I encourage you to turn to Jesus Christ as the number 1 source for your assistance. Acknowledge that you have a problem and go to Jesus and ask Him for assistance. That's what they did in Canaan. And Jesus answered their request and gave them wine. Number 3, I want to encourage you as a spouse, husband and wife, tend to your gardens. It seems somewhat silly, but in Genesis chapter 2, Adam was given 2 chores, 2 gardens that he was to tend. The first one you're very familiar with. What was the garden he was supposed to tend to? The Garden of Eden. Very true. That was his duty. Tend to it. What was the other garden that he was to tend to? His wife. He had 2 gardens to tend to the Garden of Eden and the Garden of Eve. Those are 2 gardens he was to tend to. Now, we see a problem, though, in his situation because he did tend to the Garden of Eden, but as we see, he did not maybe tend as well as he should have with his relationship with Eve. Because as opposed to instructing and training her in what she should be doing, she went out and did as she felt was fit. Relate this in a certain way. Men, we must be careful that we not only do our job at work, we also do our job at home. Ladies, I encourage you, if you are a stay-at-home mother, that you not only do your job with your children in the home, you also work and tend the relationship with your husband. And I understand in both sides of the equation, a man can work for 17 hours in a day and come home and say, I ain't got no time and no energy to do anything for anybody. There may be days like that. But over a whole, men, we should not work so hard at work to make sure that we please our earthly boss and make sure we come home and take care of our heavenly boss and the responsibilities that He gives us. And wives, I would say the same for you, mothers. I know that at times my wife is just extremely exhausted from what she does at home, but it's important that she tends a relationship with me as well. I'll just give a few examples. Often we can take care of our Garden of Eden and leave our relationship with our spouse unattended. And here's what it says in Proverbs chapter 24. I want to show you this. And Ethan, I want to just mention this to you, or ask you, what kind of a marriage would God desire for you and Courtney to have? Sure. A godly one would be a great answer. I would also submit to you, Ethan, that God desires for you to have a wonderful marriage. You know, if you follow the methods that the world used, you have some examples around you of not a good marriage. You've seen those examples. But if you follow what God's Word instructs you to do, you can not only have a good but a great marriage. And I want to just encourage us that are married, do we have a marriage that would encourage our children, or would our children be encouraged to get married by our example? Or do our children say, I really don't want to be married because I see the turmoil it causes in my parents? Do you have a good example in your home of what marriage should be like? My wife and I talked a little bit about that last night, about the idea that my wife was saying that if she doesn't love her children, when her children grow up, her children won't love her. And if we don't set an environment in our home to where we show them what a godly marriage looks like, our children may not want to get married. So I wanted to show you this in Proverbs chapter 24, verse 30 through 32. And this is often our approach as men. I will speak for myself. It can be our approach when it comes to tending the garden of our spouses, our wives. I went to the field of a lazy man, and by the vineyard of the man devoid of understanding, and there it was, all overgrown with thorns. Its surface was covered with nettles. Its stone wall was broken down. When I saw it, I considered it well. I looked on it and received instruction. How many of us do that when it comes to our tending of our relationship with our spouse? That we become lazy. And we say, well, my wife is never going to divorce me because Clayson teaches that divorce is wrong, so she'll never divorce me no matter how I treat her. How do we treat our spouses? Do we get lazy towards them and just say, well, they'll put up with my lack of love and lack of tender care? I hope not. Our marriages can be one that becomes overgrown with thorns, covered with nettles, and the stone wall broken down. It can be in disrepair. And really, when a stone wall comes down, it doesn't have to just all fall at once. It can come one brick at a time. We'll begin to forget about the importance of the home life. And I would just encourage you, Ethan and Courtney, and all of us, that your relationship with your wife and your children are the most important thing, separate from your relationship with Jesus Christ. Work must be secondary. Because if we allow our tending of that field to become primary and leave this on the back burner, it will suffer loss. There are many examples around us, and I pray that you would look at verse 32 and set it in your heart, that you would consider what your marriage could be like by looking at those on the outside. You do not have to look very far. Some of us can look at them with our own families and see divorce, and maybe not divorce physically, but divorce spiritually, where they are so on different sides of the spectrum, and the harm that comes from it. And may you look at it and receive instruction. May that not be your desire. Remember that when you face problems, God is able, number one. Number two, acknowledge that you have lack and you have need of Christ to help you. And number three, tend to your gardens. Don't leave your relationship with your spouse on the back burner. I want to say that because I am very blessed with my wife. There is such a blessing there that you men experience probably with your wives as well. It is a good thing to have my wife as a helpmate. I mentioned in my note to her that she often prays for me and encourages me along the path that God has taken us. Some of you probably know a little bit of what we go through, but the life of what we live as a minister, often there are days that we don't get to spend hours with each other. There are days that maybe she tends to the kids more than 8 hours a day. There are times when I may be on the phone with somebody or visiting someone that we're not able to spend as much time as we would like with each other. And it takes patience. It takes understanding. My wife has been very good, and I've mentioned this many times to you. I could not do the job I do if she didn't do the job that she did with joy. And so I want to lift my wife up today and say thank you. Thank you for standing by my side for 12 years. And I look forward to many, many more. Many more.